This episode is brought to you by our Patreon supporters. Become a patron today at patreon.com/intotheportal. Small, subterranean creatures that have become known over the centuries as goblins have long straddled the line between myth and reality. Often witnessed around quarries and inside mines, sometimes even leading those searching for gold to that one true vein, other times guiding men to their deaths, deep inside tunnels beneath the earth of Bavaria and Austria. But there are also creatures of small stature said to dwell in the caves and subterranean passages of North America, sometimes being linked to events and sightings that make the search for such beings all the more strange. Join us this week on Into the Portal as we look deep within the earth, exploring tunnels and caves in search of the genesis of the Goblin.
Hello, and welcome back into the portal. I'm Amber Ray.
And I'm Andrew McKay.
And we got part 2 for our Genesis of the Goblins series.
Well done. Good delivery there.
Yeah?
Yeah,
You like that one?
Yeah,
Okay.
I liked it.
Sweet.
Yeah, back with part 2. And I kind of originally, when we were dividing these up, I thought part 2 would be like, yeah, we're jumping across the pond. We're getting into some crazy North American folklore here. But you know what? We actually have some stuff left off in Europe to touch on here. That's really, really critical, really cool stuff.
It really lends a lot to the sort of, I don't even know, like the foundation of all of this, I would say.
Definitely.
But before we get into that, obviously we've got our housekeeping.
Tiny bit of housekeeping, and yeah, it was really, really awesome to see this week. We had 3 new 5-star reviews on the US iTunes, so that
cool.
Totally made our day. Yeah, first one, 5 stars coming from Laser121. Laser, love it. They say, amazing show, history, mysteries, cryptids, and so much more. I've listened to every episode of this podcast, and it makes my long commute to work so much easier.
What?
Which is dope, because that's exactly what the show is for, so that's
It totally
awesome.
is.
The second one was from Stubbsy26. 5 stars, and it just says, hi. You guys are awesome. I love the bubbly positivity.
I thought you were just going to say hi, and that's it.
Love the bubbly positivity you guys bring to every episode, so that's cool too.
Cool.
And then the most recent one from February 15th, Captain Selly. 5 stars. Great podcast. It reads, I really enjoy the topics and the banter. They do a great job, in my humble opinion, and the episodes are really fun. They cover some topics that aren't very common among other paranormal style podcasts, and that's pretty much what we're going for. And he references the homunculus episode that he just listened to.
We were just talking about that episode.
Very
hey?
serendipitous.
Yeah, and the whole, what was that movie?
Ooh, oh gosh, we gotta pull it up again. The guy where it's like, to a new world of gods and monsters, right? That epic line, and we had it in a Facebook post or something.
Yeah, I can't remember. I think it was like Dr. Frankenstein or something like that, or Bride of Frankenstein? Bride of Frankenstein.
Was it Bride of Frankenstein?
I don't know. It was something like that.
We're gonna whatever it is, we are gonna figure it out and cover it on Film Friday, I think, right? Yeah. And once again, we do have our the ITP bulldog in the background here, just snorting and wailing away. But I'm not gonna stop the recording for it. Stella, can you just shut up? Come on.
I'm not even gonna call her a bulldog. She's like our very own cryptid creature, because she's more like a cross between like a gargoyle / gremlin.
The noises this dog makes is just, we've said it a million times and we've never actually done it. We need to record these sounds because people wouldn't even believe it's coming from a boxer bulldog.
They wouldn't.
It's like just monstrous,
like
sometimes.
Hounds from hell or something.
Oh my god, totally. From the depths of the pit of Hasselhoska or something. Oh man. Okay, we're getting a little off topic here.
Okay.
But yeah, thank you for those reviews, you guys.
Appreciate that.
Appreciate it.
That's really cool. Well, I think we're just getting into a bit of a recap here. Let's just, before we dive right into our second part here, let's just go through what we covered in part 1, just briefly here. We
sounds good.
obviously delved into the origins, the genesis of all this stuff, more ancient forms of goblin lore, including ancient Greece was a big one, right? We
Definitely.
have the Calicanzaros, a few different versions, kind of bleeding into the whole like pagan medieval era. We talked quite a bit about all the
kobold in
right.
Germanic folklore that would have sort of developed out of that pagan Europe and into creatures that were associated with Christian beliefs too as well, and
Exactly.
into demonology and things like that.
Exactly. And then that's where we kind of had this interesting sort of split between goblins that appeared more so almost along the lines of like house elf kind of sort of things where they're a little bit more helpful, maybe can be compared to like the brownies of say UK lore, that type of thing.
Yeah.
But then again, there's kind of like this it is ambiguous, right? Because they can almost be both. And we mentioned one in particular that we're going to get into right now, the red caps, and how we portrayed them as basically being these benevolent little helpers, but they're really a little bit more nefarious than that.
Yeah, or at least they can be.
Yeah.
They are sometimes nice.
Well, that's just it, yeah.
But,
so you get multiple, variations of accounts where these things can either do good, do bad, or be somewhere in the middle.
Definitely.
And then as well, we did cover, before we dive into exactly talking about the red caps, I just want to mention briefly again the whole Paracelsus, the
Right.
ties to alchemy, the whole idea that these creatures could be what we're kind of referred to as elementals. So they're sort of like these, again, right, more ambiguous, less certain sort of parts of our physical world, but they kind of bleed into the more metaphysical.
Yeah, they were almost like, it's almost like the way I read it or perceive it is like almost that goblins or these types of creatures described as elementals are, in certain cases or contexts, the physical manifestation of the elements, right? Or of the metaphysical world that we most often can't interact with or can't see.
Exactly, like kind of like this beyond our perception, so to speak.
Right.
And this whole idea that Paracelsus had, it was almost like a binary between, so each of the elements, the fire, water, wind, air, wind and air is the same thing. Fire, water, fire, water, earth. That's what I'm saying. And air. All of these 4 categories had a visible, tangible sort of, exactly that, like a physical form, and then they had this less physical, less tangible sort of spiritual form, if you want to get into that. Like, he kind of phrased it differently, but again, that's basic idea here. And we're going to kind of be working with that as a possible framework for understanding what's going on in North America when we get to there, and then as well in Europe and all that.
It's kind of funny because obviously Paracelsus gets a little crazy, gets a little out there with a lot of the ideas we've talked about regarding him in other episodes and stuff, but there is some crossover. There are some parallels to be drawn to the experiences and the way in which other things are kind of seen, right? So we'll get into ideas of interdimensionality and all kinds of weird stuff, but
yes. Lifting the veil or different layers, and anyways,
there's substance to it though. It's not all hairy-fairy.
No.
It's anyway, we're gonna do that. I'm excited.
Okay, before we get into all these different types of goblins in North America and this phenomena taking place over on our side of the pond, we have exactly one type of goblin that we did reference in part 1. Didn't get into very much detail, but we're going to kind of go there. And this was kind of brought to our attention by Quirky Shark. We interact with them on
Twitter, I think, right?
Or is it Twitter? No, I think it's Instagram, sorry.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, they messaged us and said like, oh, just FYI, red caps. Not as benevolent as you might think.
Totally. And I'm glad, we didn't get into a ton of detail on them at all, but we did make a loose reference that they are mostly benevolent.
It was a passing reference. Mm-hmm.
But indeed, they are not always this way. So In fact, actually, they're most often referred to as malevolent, murderous goblins that are found in border folklore. So between Ireland, Scotland, British folklore kind of crosses over. They're said to inhabit essentially ruined castles along, the Anglo-Scottish border and places like this.
Yeah.
But especially places where there were scenes of, especially horrific, terrible, tyranny and murderous deeds and things, right? They were drawn to these types of places. At least that's what people thought.
Bloody history.
According to actually this guy named William Henderson, he was a 19th century folklorist and writer. He described the Redcaps as that they live in a string of ruined castles stretching along the border between England and Scotland specifically, and that they favor these castles of violent, tyrannical events. So he was the one who kind of made the specific reference to this.
Okay.
And some believe that the Redcaps name comes from the tendency, and nobody really knows why, but they allegedly have this tendency to soak their cap in the fresh blood of whoever seems to trespass or mess with them.
Their latest victim.
Hence the alternative name that they're sometimes referred to as Bloody Cap.
Bloody cap.
So definitely not the Dobby the house helpful house elf.
Oh, God. Quite the opposite, seemingly. That's so funny when you said... I don't know why I just started chuckling because you said the Anglo-Irish-Scottish border, and that just reminded me of that. What were we watching, like, literally just yesterday?
Oh, yeah, we made a joke about it because it's an island, obviously,
from
right?
Dublin, right along the border of Scottish.
I don't
and Irish.
literally mean a border, but I just mean, like, in the folklore of those sort of three nations.
What was
right?
that, though, that we were watching? And he said he was from Dublin. He was, like, trying to come up with... Like,
that was Seinfeld, where they
Right.
where they pick up O'Brien and they jack the limousine, and he ends up being a white supremacist leader. Oh man, that was
We've
a
been
good
like
one.
just chain watching Seinfeld.
Yeah, gone back to it.
Anyway, sorry, back onto the Redcaps.
Yeah. Sorry, back to the Redcaps.
These Scottish, Irish, British Redcap.
Right. I mean, they are mostly coming out of the UK, like from the British side of things. I believe it's not so much in other. There's other creatures of similar creatures in sort of specific Irish and Scottish folklore. But we're talking about Redcaps. So yeah, there's other stories that, like I said, like they will prey on the people that come into these abandoned castles. Not all the time. Sometimes they will just mess with them, taunt them, tease them. The typical goblin things we've talked about. But
Tricksters.
most often they will outright kill them and soak their hats in their blood.
Jeez. Why do they need red hats, man?
Yeah, I don't know. Why do you need hats at all if you're living? I mean, if you're in a castle.
Oh, there you go. Not a lot of wind. Need some ear protection? Like, that's the only reason I wear a hat. I don't know. Not a lot of sun. You don't need a sun hat. Like, sorry.
Oh my god. Okay, there's a slightly different version to this too.
Okay.
According to the Mythical Creatures Guide, which is essentially just an online blog, they are also sometimes known as Powry or Dunter, a type of malevolent, murderous dwarf, goblin, elf, or fairy that is also found in the similar border folklore. So I don't really know what to make of that. But
Well, okay, so that's interesting because we get a bit of a description here too, which is kind
why
of...
don't you go for it?
It's sturdy old men. That's strange.
Well, remember we talked about this in part 1, how the Calacanzaros were most often described as male, with male features. Or was it the kobolds?
No, I think it was Calacanzaros.
Okay.
That's interesting, though. And you do we had references in part 1 to shape-shifting.
Yeah.
So these could appear as old men in one scene. Like, remember that anecdote about the priest in, like, the 1600s, and he met his, like, basically what looked like his double, but it was a goblin? And then that's where you get this thing with, like, familiars. So I have actually a story about one of these Redcaps being a familiar.
Interesting.
And we had this reference in relation to Sabrina in part 1.
Right.
Where essentially a familiar is a goblin that is kind of... It's like the assistant to its sort of sorcerer master, so to speak. It's kind of like this... like a symbiotic relationship between the two. And it's kind of his helpful magical helper or something like that. But these can obviously take on more nefarious forms too. And we have such a case in the 14th century with this man named Lord William de Solis of Hermitage Castle, which immediately makes me think of Hermitage wine. But anyways, okay, so this guy, de Solis, he was... interesting bird. Very much hated lord of his time. He lived in exactly that, the borderlands between Scotland and England. And he was one of those people, right, because he was powerful. He was a lord. He would kind of be inducted into these political feuds and infighting, right? Because
Right.
long history of that in
big
the UK
time.
Isles. So oftentimes he would be switching sides between Scotland and England as the political tides turn. There's one such story that goes that essentially there's two stories of his death. and one version is closely related to what we're talking about today with the familiars. The second version is much more cut and dry historical, that he was essentially just rounded up during one of these times of political turmoil and basically murked. But yeah, so the other one is more interesting though, and it comes about, well, it was popularized by this ballad that was eventually collected by Sir Walter Scott. Okay. And in this ballad, William de Soulis is kind of depicted as this huge and physically powerful man. And when he becomes Lord of Hermitage Castle in 1318, he basically kind of devolves into this very exactly, like very malicious, very evil type lord. Deep vein of cruelty is how it's described. Was basically imbued in him, and everyone hated him. Okay. Loathed by all who came into contact with him. He was very. You couldn't really reason with him. He was very unreasonable. He had basically gone to a lot of fights in the streets. He was responsible for a lot of deaths. More than one time, he was almost lynched by his own subjects, but he was saved by neighboring lords that came to his aid. But anyways,
Piece of work, this guy.
Yeah, exactly. So in this story that was sort of immemorialized in a ballad, he's basically a practitioner of black magic and the black arts. And supposedly it goes that he kidnapped local children and he would use their blood in dark rituals at this castle.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's a turn.
That's a turn.
That's a bit of a turn.
And this is where we get the introduction of the familiar, who is Robin Redcap. So again, we get... Yeah, exactly. So Robin Redcap is basically his evil assistant. He kind of roams the countryside at night, I would assume, because, again, they're nocturnal. But essentially he goes and terrorizes the people, and him and his master, this William de Soulis, are just like freaking just... Yeah, crazy people. But essentially, Robin Redcap lives in a chest, and he enchants William. So he uses his magical powers to give him the ability to repel metal weapons. So now he's basically invincible. So you can't kill him with a sword, you can't kill him with a knife, you can't kill him with a bullet, right? Because that's metal too. And so, yeah, they basically had this very... dark reign, I guess you could describe it, where he was practicing these dark arts, becoming more and more hated. And there's this interesting description of Redcaps, and they're described as being very quick. So Robin Redcap would have been this like very like speedy little like demon little thing going around. And despite this, like they had like these really heavy boots apparently, and they always carried a pike, so they're kind of like miner like, right? But despite this, they were very, very quick, and the only way to escape one is to quote a passage from the Bible at it, where it would lose a tooth. I don't even know what that would do, but anyways, that was one really weird thing. So apparently this Robin Redcap, again, reign of terror, essentially, you could describe it. He's like, what's that guy, Robespierre? Robespierre's reign of terror. Remember learning about that?
Yeah, vaguely.
In like grade 10 socials. Like, long time ago. It's like over a decade.
And that's the second time we've referenced grade 10 socials in the last
grade 10
4 or 5.
socials. We should teach grade 10 socials.
Give me some Louis Riel in here, you know what I'm saying?
Please. Okay, so these guys are just like terrorizing everyone until... This is where we get the second story of William's death, as according to this ballad. And let's just say it is bloody.
Okay, let's hear it.
Okay, so this is a quote. It says, complaints about de Soulis' activities were frequently reaching the ears of King Robert the Bruce. I don't know who that is. King Robert the Bruce himself.
Brucey the Masusi.
Brucey. And when he was told of this latest outrage, Bruce, in exasperation, cried, Soulis, Soulis, go boil him in a brew. Needing no further invitation, the locals overpowered de Soulis, using a specially forged chain to bind him, as ordinary ropes could not contain his supernatural powers. And they took him to the summit of the Nine-Stang Rig. Nine-Stang Rig. I guess that's an important place to be. A
mountain of some sort?
It sounds like it, yeah. It's like some sort of summit. And it says here, it was believed that de Soulis could not be killed by ordinary means. So instead, he was boiled in molten lead in a cauldron and suspended above a large fire. When news reached the king that his words were being taken literally, he sent soldiers to Hermitage, but it was too late. They were only able to report back what had happened.
Wow. That's like a scene out of Harry Potter or something.
I know. It's creepy. And you know what doesn't make sense to me about that is that they used the one thing that he was supposedly invincible against, which is metal. They used molten lead, which is bizarre, right? Why would you just use why would you just burn him alive? That's not a... You know, that'd be easy.
I suppose the fact that it was molten maybe changed the its effect. But yeah, that is a bizarre story, and obviously a good indication of why the Redcaps are mostly considered as not so nice to deal with.
Exactly. If they were seen as the aid to evil lords such as this guy, even if I'm not even sure if this guy's just of fables or if he actually has a historical record. I haven't looked that far into it.
And I mean,
but he was a part of undiscoveredscotland.com, so
right, okay.
I don't know.
I mean, I'm definitely seeing some connections potentially to what we were talking about with Paracelsus. I mean, obviously it's being described as black magic in this legend, but there's something going on here that's beyond just, black magic and alchemy were definitely equated with one another in a lot of circles, right? Like when it was going through its, dying days of people practicing alchemy.
Exactly. Those sort of perceptions. It's kind of unfortunate though, because a lot of alchemists obviously don't have these sort of nefarious intentions. They're not kidnapping babies or children or anything. They might be using dead body parts, but
totally. But here's just a thought though. Like the movie this is going to sound like a tangent, but it's not. The movie we just watched, Primer. They're dealing with science, yada yada yada. They accidentally go watch the movie. People, spoiler alert. Okay. They accidentally invent time travel. The same sort of things can happen potentially, I think, in alchemy back in the day. You're trying to do one thing, sure. You're trying to make gold out of nothing. Maybe that's impossible, right? Yeah. But you accidentally stumble upon something else purely on circumstance alone and context and whatever. Yeah. And these types of legends pop up from potentially things like that.
Oh, totally.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. So, but it's interesting though because like I was trying to make the distinction between, say, perceptions of like political evildoers or whatever, and then sort of like misplaced fears and misperceptions of, say, alchemy and what these people are actually trying to do. Right. But you get it.
Sure. Sorry. I didn't mean to hijack that from you there.
No, totally. One other interesting thing before we move away from Redcaps is this idea that they are mentioned in Harry Potter in the Prisoner of
they
Azkaban.
actually are.
Yeah.
Okay, right. That's
very cool. She mentions everything that's cool, right?
Yeah, she's on top of it. She's on top of it.
Yeah, and then she kind of refers to them as these goblin-like creatures that lurk in places where blood has been shed. And I guess they are referenced also in her series, The Fantastic Beasts, and Where to Find Them.
Okay.
So it makes sense, right? Obviously, it makes even more sense with the Fantastic Beasts one, right? Because I'm assuming she's probably... I haven't really got into that series, but I'm assuming she's probably ripping off a lot of, like, traditional folkloric...
Oh, of course. The same with just the first...
all of them, right? Like the Hippogriff, all of those sort of magical...
Well,
even house elves.
Isn't Paracelsus in... Or not Paracelsus,
Nicholas Flamel.
Nicholas Flamel.
Yeah.
Super famous alchemist, right?
I love him in The Fantastic Beasts, like the second one, where he's like just like this super old guy that can't really do much, and he's just kind of... Oh, wait, no. That was someone else, because Nicholas Flamel ends up dying, doesn't he? Oh, wait, no.
This is just
We're going back in time. We're going back in time for the Fantastic Beasts. That's why, right? The timeline's in like just before World War II.
Something like that, yeah.
So that makes sense that he dies later on when Harry Potter's actually alive.
Right.
I always get confused with that now.
We should just start from the beginning. Usually around Christmas time, we like to do a little marathon of that series.
Christmas tradition.
But anyway, so, I mean, more or less, the Redcaps, these types of goblins could really be considered more so goblins of folklore.
Perhaps,
Even though they have been described as being seen, and they're seen in, they're found in legends like the one you just read. And their physical description is very similar to that story we told in part 1, too, with, the name is escaping me now, but the young couple whose husband was a mining engineer, and her and their friends witnessed those goblins in the tunnel across from their cottage, right?
Madame...
Kolodzi, or something along those lines. Anyway, I don't have the part 1 notes right here in front of me. But go listen to it, people. You probably should have. But yeah, they are described similarly. So I don't know if they are some more folklore or not. But they are described as coming out of the same sort of dark places. So it's not just castles and places like that. it's caves and mines and quarries and castles that are close to these types of places as well. So they're still linked to the darkness, still linked to, coming out at nighttime and doing nefarious things.
Nocturnal, subterranean, and exactly the physical description. Mm-hmm.
I mean, even when I think of a castle, it's obviously not underground, but it's like the most, this is going to sound stupid, but it's like the most underground feeling you could have above ground in a building. In a castle.
Being in a castle,
right?
Yeah.
Like out of stone and like
totally.
You go into the lower chambers or whatever and
oh, for sure. And not to mention that, exactly that. It feels closer to it, but then those are prime places for lots of subterranean passages to kind of extend out from.
Indeed.
And we're going to get into that like right now.
Right this second.
Right now.
Okay. So this is something that we kind of like we held off from touching on in part 1 because there's so much to get to here.
Yeah.
There are very, very real goblin tunnels, as some people describe them, okay? Colloquially, we'll say, like as a fun sort of reference.
Yeah.
They're called the Erdstall tunnels, and they are found throughout Western Europe and other places around the world as well. But they are most significantly found in the southeastern German state of Bavaria and Austria, and it's essentially a type of tunnel that's just, it's very, very small. So they are thought to have been created during the Middle Ages by some, but others have claimed that these tunnels date all the way back to the Stone Age.
And beyond, like Neolithic era.
Yeah, it's... Okay, this gets really strange. So this is the ground beneath southern Germany, the state of Bavaria. It's literally perforated with these underground mazes. When you look at it, there's a few different renditions of it. It looks like an ant colony.
It kind of does. They have been described alternatively as labyrinths of vaults. So like vaults being like different chambers, like rooms and stuff. But yeah, it's extensive.
Right.
Labyrinth, right? Again, like it reminds me of like the Minotaur episode we just did. Like,
and just that word alone, I mean, the implication is that you don't know where it goes, you don't know how far it is, you don't know how to get out when you're in it.
Exactly.
Unless you're the one who made it, maybe.
And the more they uncover these using like ground penetrating radar, the more it becomes exactly that. It's like a maze. It's like these weird loops that go nowhere. Like, anyways.
Yeah. But even with that's cool because it's like, even with ground penetrating radar, we can't get to everything, right? Because this is we're going through bedrock, we don't really know where all of these go to. But the word Erdstall, we have a reference here. I'm not actually sure where it's from, but it's derived from the German language, roughly translated as earth stable or mining tunnel. I might have to check with Mr. Travis Dow on that one if he can give us the exact translation. Shout out to History of Alchemy podcast. But since we're talking about alchemy so much here, right?
Yeah.
But so like whilst various types of underground tunnels are known to exist around the world, these ones have features that really distinguish them from other passageways, right? So like you just said, they've been described as labyrinths or vaults. Why don't you read this little this quote here, Amber?
Oh, well, there was this interesting thing. Okay, so these have a long history in Europe, but it's only recently that they've kind of been incorporated into more professional investigations and that type of thing. But yeah, exactly that. So one pioneer of these Erdstall explorations was a guy named Lambert Karner. He lived from 1841 to 1909. He was actually a priest.
Really?
Yeah. According to his records, he crawled through over 400 of these vaults. And it was lit by only a flickering candlelight, and he experienced all sorts of crazy things. He went through these strange, quote-unquote, strange winding passages through which one can often only force oneself like a worm. So he's literally crawling through these things. Like, it's tight. I'm trying to imagine how big this Lambert guy was.
Probably super tiny.
Probably, yeah. And he was just like an amateur archaeologist. Like, very enthusiastic, obviously, because you would catch me doing that.
There was a lot of priests that fell into that category. Remember there was that one we referenced in like Mukele and Mbembe, like those early missionaries, right, who were going looking for crazy creatures and things like that too.
Well, not even so much going specifically for that, but along the way of trying to convert these sort of non-Christian populations, they end up hearing stuff along the way, kind of thing.
Yeah, but they get interested in it, and he, went out looking for the footprints and those types of things.
Yeah.
Right? So, I mean, anyway, it's just kind of interesting. With just a flickering candlelight, like, man, what if that blows out, dude? How are you going to find your way back?
Oh, exactly. What if you don't have any... I guess that's a good indication of the oxygen, and if there's even, like, a slight sort of... like airflow kind of thing. You could
That's a good point.
Use that as an indicator. I would bring in a canary with me too. The classic canary in the tunnel.
Yeah.
Yeah, but these are very interesting. There's a lot of features that make these sort of unique.
really, like you just said, like you had to worm through some of these parts, and by all accounts, he was a small man. Like in general, these networks, they consist of very, very low, narrow tunnels that are generally an oval shape, and they're aligned either sort of vertically or horizontally, so they look very much like deliberate passageways. They've been found, these tunnels usually extend over a distance between 20 and 50 meters, but there's many, many points where we don't actually know how far they go.
Exactly.
Or the reason why they're there, or who made them, or how old they are, or any of those things.
They're narrow, like maximum width of 60 centimeters or 24 inches. Like, that's small.
Right. This is goblin size.
Goblin size, exactly.
Child size.
Yeah, if you haven't caught our inferences.
Right. And of course, the majority of these, the most significant of these tunnels, again, just to reiterate this, are located in the area where kobold legend and the goblins of Germanic and pagan pre-Christian Europe folklore originate.
Totally. And you know what's interesting? I actually saw a reference that's not corroborated at all, but some people were saying that these tunnels could actually probably extend all the way to like the UK, so like underneath the ocean.
I mean, there's been even speculation they extend from there all the way through into Turkey.
Oh, wow.
Which has been, like, more or less disproven.
Yeah.
But
it's pretty crazy,
not necessarily 100%. Who knows how deep something might be.
Yeah. Another really unique feature of these Erdstall tunnels is what's known as a Schloof, which means it's, like, German for slip out.
Yeah.
And basically what these are extremely tight holes that are about 40 centimeters in diameter. So, again, that would be just under 20 inches, I would imagine, like maybe 15 to 18 inches.
I don't know the exact conversion of that.
Well, 60 centimeters is 24 inches, so 40 centimeters would be about...
Oh, yeah.
But anyways, it serves as basically transition points between tunnels, and tunnels that are situated at different elevations, so it's like connective points.
Yeah.
So things that might have been potentially added in later as these get more complicated. I don't know.
Are they... Yeah, like are things living down here? Like what's going on?
Whoa, we're gonna get to that. Well, actually, no. Yeah, we will get to that in a second. But these slip outs are interesting though, because this is a little quote. It says here, they're too narrow for older or overweight persons. A person needs to crawl under the slip hole, stand up, thereby sliding the shoulders through the skin tight hole, allowing to crawl onto the higher tunnel. Sort of awkward wording that was translated from Der Spiegel. But anyways, yeah, so they've, this is interesting. I saw reference to these slip outs being compared to a particular female reproductive organ. And some have actually cited the experience of trying to get through one of these as literally slipping into a birth canal.
Alrighty.
It's that... And you know what also kind of helps paint that picture even more of like a birthing canal and like the womb is the fact that you are going into a mountain, you're going into subterranean darkness, and you're probably going into a wet atmosphere, right? Like I could just picture like the drip, 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 the stalactites and stalagmites and all this kind of stuff, and you're just slipping into this little womb.
Oh, you are just really painting that picture right now.
Well, it makes sense. And there was actually even a series of I think it was like seminars or like workshops held by these female healers that went into one of these caves and they were doing stuff in there. I don't know what.
Well, and we were just talking about a couple of our Monkey God series before we started recording, and the significance of death and the afterlife, burials inside caves and transition points inside caves. I don't know if there's any real parallels there, but that's sort of an interesting
I'll get to that.
Comparison.
Because I have a whole section here on like the significance of these. There is potential spiritual significance and there is ties.
Wonderful.
Yeah, but essentially there are, like we referred to, there's so many of these in Europe. Probably there's close to 2,000, probably more than that, known in Europe. Mm-hmm. But people estimate that it's probably about 10% of what is actually existing there that we know of. And 90% of it still remains undiscovered, unmapped, and work continues to this day. So where they're trying to use ground penetrating radar to kind of reveal these. But
so that just reminds me, for some reason, of Kryptonite and the subterranean overlords that are eventually going to take over the Earth.
We're going to get there. But yeah, this is cool because a lot of these Sometimes they're referred to as what I said, vaults. Sometimes they're chambers. Sometimes they're just tunnels. Sometimes they're what are known as like galleries. So you get more extensive sort of chambers, seemingly.
Galleries.
And yeah, this is interesting. I had a quote here. This was from Der Spiegel again. It said here, many of these galleries are connected to the sites of former settlements. Tunnel entrances are sometimes located in kitchens of old farmhouses, near kitchens and cemeteries, or in the middle of a forest. The atmosphere inside is dark and oppressive, much as it would be inside an animal den. Yeah, so then again, it's like, okay, so if these are located underneath old farmhouses, near churches, cemeteries, so is this like storage? What's going on? What is the purpose of these tunnels? That's my big question now.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, yeah, exactly. Who made them and why? So another real strange feature about them is that there's only really one point, right? An entry point.
Yeah.
There's no necessary second exit from an individual entry point.
Which is quite common, right, with caves, like man-made caves where you have that, because it's for gases, it's for airflow, it's for all sorts of reasons. Like, I'm not a cave expert by any means, but there are practical applications for having an extra exit.
Right, so it's like some tunnel systems feature loop tunnels, so at the end of a tunnel. But I mean, so there's no real indication as to where this goes. I mean, that's the labyrinth.
You know what that reminds me of?
Right?
That loop reminds me of Ainsworth. They have the underground cave there, and it's like a loop that you go in.
Oh yeah,
and then you go, yeah.
That just carved out by water,
exactly.
But
that's natural. These are man-made.
Just like definitively, like they're not from limestone deposits that have been washed away, right? No. Which is what we get with other cave systems in North America.
Exactly. It's very clear that these are built by professionals.
Definitely, professional miners. What have we been describing as miners and living in mines? Anyway, so like some people think that these were underground bunkers potentially for hiding important things, storage, but it's like
that's shaky.
Big pain in the ass to get stuff in and out.
And not to mention that they haven't found any evidence to suggest that anything was ever stored there. And not to mention that a lot of these tunnels actually would have been flooded during the winters.
Right. That's another strange feature. Mm-hmm. Like, yeah.
Man-made, yet flooded sometimes because of groundwater levels.
Right. Anyway, others argue that, the complete lack of archaeological evidence suggests that the tunnels have never, ever been inhabited at all, right? Or
used for hiding.
Used frequently.
Yeah.
Or whatever, right?
Regularly.
Or that's an indication that they're very, very old and anything that was left in there got cleared out a long time ago.
Used by later populations or something in the area. Because even with, like, the Giza pyramids, you get things like tools being left behind in certain chambers that they're uncovering now and stuff.
Exactly.
So this is bizarre. The complete absence of any of this is weird.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. Absence of any physical evidence. It's very strange.
One thing that's coming to mind now is, like, what if it's all just washed away by the fact that it gets flooded? That's another reason.
But then you'd think at least some of the higher...
or it would collect in one area of the caves, like all of the physical objects that could get moved kind of thing.
I mean, unless there's points where any of the groundwater that does flood in, when it does end up draining out, it's one of those, like, almost like the Oak Island money pit type holes. So it's like, where the hell does this even go? We don't know where the exit is. Like, you know what I mean?
That's a good point. I like that.
We don't really know at this point. Someone's got to go down there. Tie a rope on me and send me down.
Oh, and there has been people, for sure.
So yeah, again from Der Spiegel, this is a quote. Archaeologists have also been surprised to find that the tunnels are almost completely empty and appear to be swept clean, as if they were abodes for the spirits.
Homes for the spirits, eh?
Literally, like, as if they have been cleared out.
Yeah.
And you gotta wonder, I think, maybe there was some sort of, like, weird, like, I don't know, Nazi activity going on during the Second World War. They got their tiniest little Nazis to go in there and, like, hide stuff and then clear it all out when they were done. I don't know, but... yeah, it is super, super weird.
There is some things that have been found, though. It's not completely clean.
Not completely.
But sparse.
Sparse. There was the remnants, the remains of a small fire, the coal remains. So this was discovered in Bad Zell in northern Austria and has since been dated to around 1030 to 1210-ish AD. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I mean, we're working with the Middle Ages there, right? Mm-hmm. But again, it's like, was this just a one-off vagabond,
oh, exactly, yeah, just someone that stumbled upon it and used it for convenience? Because you would think you'd find more than just one fire.
If there was some...
If it was a pattern of being used for that kind of thing.
Right. Anyway. Additional evidence has been used to date the tunnels. Is a slip passage. Fairly central. Where is this? Sorry, this is in...
it's called Rot MC.
Okay.
It's fairly central. It's a small municipality situated between Stuttgart and Nuremberg in Germany.
Okay. All right, and it has since had work done to it. It's been enhanced with stones to make it narrower, and the stone additions dated between the similar dates, like 1034 and 1268. So the Stone Age reference is still in play because we're dating the changes made.
Exactly. It's almost like getting a renovation.
Yeah.
So that's the important, kind of a part of the mystery here is dating these tunnels.
Yeah.
And like we kind of mentioned off the bat, like there is debate going on about this. Like there's one guy I came across, his name's Heinrich Kusch. Kusch? He's a prehistorian from the Austrian city of Graz, and he kind of believes that these sort of medieval leanings are kind of incorrect. And he actually suspects, he's the guy that thinks it's like Neolithic from like 5,000 years ago. And basically he's been probing the Steiermark region with giant drills for gateways to the underworld.
Well, that's just badass.
Yeah, that's crazy. So that giant drills, because it's interesting, because even like construction companies, for example, like when they're digging up for roads, when they're doing infrastructure projects, they'll come across these quite often. And then what do? Like, they don't know what to do. They're not archaeologists. They're not professionals like that. So all they do is fill them in. So it's like you're going to get fragmentary finds, I'm thinking now, right? Because if they're anywhere near accurate with their 10% discovered, 90% undiscovered, then there's still a lot here, right?
Definitely.
But anyways, there is other, sort of the more prevailing school of thought will place them a little bit, well, just in the middle, I would say, between these two competing theories of like the medieval versus Neolithic. And yeah, so basically a lot of people now are thinking that it's built during what's known as the migration period of Germany, which is called the Völkerwanderung. I love German words like that, where it's like an entire concept in one word.
Yeah, that's pretty neat.
The migration period. So this happened in the 5th and 6th centuries. And it's described as like entire tribes migrating away and leaving their homes, abandoning everything, including the cemeteries of their ancestors.
Wow.
And so one assumption is that these tunnels and galleries were created so that the dead could be venerated. I don't understand that, though, because you don't find any
indication
form of...
that there's symbolism of that at all.
No,
there's
exactly. Okay, yeah. So no symbolism, no religious sort of like drawings or writings or iconography, definitely. No bones, so it's not like an ossuary.
No offerings of any kind.
No offerings.
No, like, jewelry or...
And mind you, I'm definitely not an expert on 5th and 6th century German culture or pre-German culture or whatever.
But cultures of any kind leave things behind.
Exactly.
Anything at all.
It's weird, man. Like, I don't know if I really buy into the whole thing that these were created as, like, yeah, for the dead.
It's an interesting idea.
And again, it does play into the whole monkey god thing, right? The idea that these are places for the dead. They're sacred places, spiritual connections, getting closer to the afterlife and the underworld and etc.
Well, maybe we would find areas of these tunnels that do have these indications, but they are far, far, far further down in chambers that we don't even know exist.
There you go.
Possibly.
Exactly.
Because you're not finding evidence in what we see, so maybe that's just the driveway. The house is a lot further down. You know what I mean?
And at any rate, like we mentioned, these were definitely built by professionals. They are not natural. They are man-made. And it was described as like basically the builders would have been in a kneeling position and used these wedge-shaped tools that they would have held in both hands. And so apparently no supporting planks were used. They just kind of used these, it was kind of a strategic serpentine form that reduced pressure from the surrounding earth on the actual physical passage, so they could get away with not having these beams and these whatever else sort of infrastructural kind of elements.
I mean, it's pretty clever.
It is really clever for ancient people.
And knowing what type of rock you're dealing with.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and the weight of everything, like the weight load of everything.
Totally.
Like, it's insane.
It's just a bunch of little Ed Lead Scowlins in there just like chiseling away. They're so skinny and they just know what to do. Know how to keep up heavy stuff.
They just have a special understanding of physics.
I mean, apparently. Possibly.
Where was Ed from again? He was
from Latvia?
Okay.
Latvia?
I think it might have been.
I think he was from Latvia,
Yeah. I don't know why I'm just thinking like, oh, what if his ancestors were involved in this? And because they did have a extended background in a particular type of rock work, wasn't it? Like he was into quarrying, his whole family.
He was into quarrying, and if I'm not mistaken, he did have some connection to Germany, possibly working there before the UK and then
and there's a whole
America.
Revolution and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Anyway, we're getting off topic here.
Sorry.
But,
but yeah, just going back to that whole... The idea that these could have been built by these Volker-wandering Germans or pre-Germans that are kind of just these tribes up and just leaving everything. Hey?
It's pretty wild.
They're abandoning the cemeteries of their ancestors. So maybe actually that might make sense then, because if the dead are already buried, they're not building other tombs for them, but they're building memorials for them and places for them to be venerated. I don't know if I'm buying that. But anyways, that was one possible alternative explanation.
We're open to all explanations. So, I mean, that's interesting for sure.
I thought this was a really fun story, though. This came from 2011, just related to these tunnels. And it came from a couple living in Glon, near Munich. Glon. And they're just a couple of, rural farmers. The Gretheners were their names. And they actually had a cow fall through the entrance of one of these tunnels. So it's like this poor cow got stuck.
Oh,
poor
man.
old Bessie.
Oh, jeez.
I know. And somehow they got it out. I don't know how. Just tie a rope around it and get it out with the tractor or something?
I guess,
probably.
yeah, for sure. Get the backhoe out there and just, I don't know.
That reminds me of that Canadian song about the trucks get stuck in the mud, and then you go get the Chevy, get stuck in the mud, and you go get the Dodge, get stuck in the mud. I can't even remember who sang that.
I don't even know what that is.
Remember my aunt showed us that? Anyways.
Oh my god.
Interesting to say the least.
Indeed.
But, okay, so these Gretheners and their cow, they uncovered this hole, and Rudy, the husband, he decided he wanted to explore this hole. And so he went down, and quite quickly he ran out of oxygen. So there's not a lot of oxygen down there. And so they ended up calling, I don't even know who they called, but a series of geologists and land surveyors kind of commenced an investigation. It's one of the first, right? This is the first wave of actual legitimate geologists, people that are professionals that want to kind of uncover this mystery.
Right.
And so they started using, in conjunction with the State Office of Historic Preservations of Munich, they used ground-penetrating radar, like we said before, and tried to sort of reveal the extent of this tunnel. And this one in particular was actually collapsed on one end.
Okay.
So they couldn't follow it completely to where it needed to be or where it originally went to. But they did actually come up with a piece of decaying wood that was found further along the inside of the tunnel. And that was brought up by this investigator of the group. He was one of the leaders. His name was Dieter Alborn. And he ended up grabbing it before returning to the surface quick because, again, he was running out of oxygen. And I don't know why they weren't using oxygen tanks. That seems like a no-brainer.
Might just be something you'd have in case.
Yeah. So I was trying to find in the article, if they had actually got around to dating it, but I couldn't really see that, which really irked me. And I was like, oh, come on. How old would that piece of wood have to be? I'm going to assume it was probably dating to about the medieval, but I'm not going to make any assumptions with that one.
I'm assuming, but you're not going to assume.
I'm assuming, but I'm not going to say.
All right.
Just call me out on that. So let's get into these purposes then.
Sure.
Because we said, secret hideaways, escape tunnels, ancient mines. Did they have spiritual, religious significance? And you've already brought up, these Lost City of the Monkey God. There was that one ossuary called the Cave of the Glowing Skulls that was uncovered in Honduras.
That's right.
And, there was all sorts of treasures that went along with it, though. There was gold, jade pottery, all sorts of stuff.
It was very much this is the ultimate offering. This is the transition point, right, between the living and the dead.
Yeah. So very, I'm not going to say very obvious, but come on, it's not like these where there's just a complete absence of anything.
Right.
One small fire, that to me speaks to exactly what you said, a squatter that kind of came across it and was like, okay, I'll use this for a little bit.
Pretty much.
And if there was only the fire and nothing else, no bones, of say a meal, the remains of a meal or anything else, or...
There's no hieroglyphs, there's no, there's nothing.
No.
It's as it was meant to be a mystery, right? It was whoever did dig them, it was very much to be a secret passageway. Mm-hmm. It wasn't meant to be figured out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. There was this one farmer, this wasn't the Glon couple, but he has a tunnel on his property as well. And he always claims that when he goes inside of it, he feels this very strange sense of reverence.
Okay.
And he said, you feel like a Hopi Indian inside. They, too, used to sit in caves in the hope of finding answers.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
Sit in caves in the hope of finding
Gandhi
answers.
go sit in a cave forever? Or no, am I thinking of the original? Who was the original Buddhist guy? It was just Buddha? He went and sat in a cave forever?
Something like that. That sounds right.
But that's just it, though, right? Like, the idea that this reverence, this spiritual connection.
Definitely. And it's ubiquitous around the world in a lot of different cultures. Mm-hmm. There is something about the physical transition between, like, you know, the world outside of the entrance to a mountain, essentially through a cave, and there's just a feeling, like, if you've ever even gone on like a mine tour or something, like, this is reminding me of when I was a kid and I would go on the mine tours out in Rossland, and how you really do feel like you're gone into another world, right?
Right.
Even if it's just a mine tour. But you can really see how, if, like, people are in tune or in touch with different things, how this crossing over, going through, is sort of a metaphorical portal, if you will.
Yeah.
Was more significant, or could have been more significant. Like, when you would go into these things, like, it's 35 degrees outside in the dead of summer, you take 2 steps in and you are
cold.
Frozen solid.
Yeah.
And there's stalactites and stalagmites everywhere, and you weave around and the rock color changes, and you keep going deeper and deeper, and as you go deeper, the world seems more and more different. It's very, very strange.
Imagine being like combining like psychotropic substances with that too. Like, I'm thinking of the Minoans again, right? Like, when we looked at Crete and the labyrinth and how they had, I can't remember what the cave was called, but there was this one very significant cave where they had like an idol of a goddess, and they would go in there and it wasn't peyote, that's North American, but it was some sort of substance they would use, and they would kind of like hallucinate and become closer to the gods. Right.
Which was the case with a lot of, just shamanic practice and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And there's something to it. Or there's something to it. So there's something real in the perception of what's happening when you're living that experience, I feel. Absolutely.
And we're kind of crossing lines, I feel like now. We're going into like a whole like sort of ethereal plane. But again, right, like we are kind of trying to make these connections between these sorts of tunnels and goblin lore.
Sightings of goblins, the genesis of the lore, for sure.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
So where are we at here? The significance of the folklore, I suppose, is where we'd be getting into now. For some of the locals, these tunnels have been associated with, of course, these legendary creatures like the kobolds, specifically, or which, of course, directly translates to goblin in German, right? But also other creatures, too. Elves, gnomes, things like that we've referenced before, creatures who have said to have built them or believed to live in similar passageways, right? Small and tucked away. So in some places, fancy names have been given to the Erdstalls to sort of reflect their association with local folklore, such as here I go, my best attempt here, the Schrazenlosch.
Ooh, I like that.
Or a goblin hole. The Alaranenhole. Or a mandrake cave.
Oh, mandrake!
Here we are with another Harry Potter reference.
Nice.
Others have speculated that these Erdstalls were connected to castles themselves and served as secret escape routes. And what were we just referencing in association with castles? The Redcap goblins.
Exactly that. So maybe Robin Redcap was going through these tunnels, passages, and then terrorizing the villagers, like coming out of these things unexpectedly in different places and rounding them. And then that's probably how they transported their victims back to the castle too, right?
Exactly. So these tunnels were said to originate under like the kitchens, specifically a lot of the times of these old castles throughout Europe. And although experts have still concluded that they wouldn't have served as a practical purpose, like for actual like escape routes due to the size, who knows, right? Escape routes for what? Maybe it's not really the people.
Well, if you have a castle siege, oh my god, there's one reference in Tristan and Isolde to exactly that, where there's like an underground tunnel in the keep of the castle, and in the end, it's Tristan's undoing because him and his friend, what's his friend's name? It's like his cousin. Anyways, he ends up betraying him, and it's this whole sad thing, but definitely very common.
We should just watch that movie again because you bring it up all the time. All the time. I guess we should just do it on Film Friday, even if it's because it technically is a historical film, I suppose you could say.
Oh yeah.
Anyway,
For sure.
Another idea though, just to get back to these guys here, is that, I guess tunnels, is the idea that they could have originated under the homes of a lot of places in sort of Bavaria and Austria and stuff like that on purpose. Like people wanted to have sort of places where a helpful goblin could have an easier time entering their home. Remember we talked about in part 1 too that a lot of times there would be engravings on the outsides of people's homes in pagan Europe, or just very, very like post-pagan Europe, almost as like a
welcoming.
Yeah, almost like an evil eye type deal.
Yes.
Or kind of crossing lines with like gargoyle, like on your own house, like you carve a symbol of the creature, right?
The representation that wards off.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, there was one cool thing I got from Der Spiegel again.
Okay.
That was an interesting article, but less related to goblin lore. But it's this idea that some believe these caves were used as winter quarters by the Teutonic tribes, which I apologize in advance because I actually don't know anything about the Teutonic tribes, but I kind of want to know more. But anyways, and then also the idea that they could have been dungeons for the disabled.
Dungeons for the disabled. That is a dark thought.
That's effed up. I don't even want to go there. Another one was that it says, today, some more esoteric souls interpret them as spaces of non-being. I like that.
What the hell does that
That's
mean?
an ambivalent zone there. That's like almost like what we were talking about with the void, where there's like that transitory void of like sort of like a oh my gosh, what am I trying to say? Like the purgatory.
Sure, and I mean that maybe that's why there's literally no indication of who built them. There's not even a frickin' there's no even real indication of like here's the chiseling marks, right?
Yeah.
Like here's the speculation on like what type of tools would have been used, and these types of tools are super duper similar to.
There was one reference to like the double-handed scoop shovel that they would have used, and they would have been on their hands and knees essentially.
Right. But it's like that's so generic. Yeah. Like that's just so generic. I mean, if you're digging a tunnel anywhere, that's how you're going to make a tunnel, right? There's no clear indication like an arrowhead. Here you find an arrowhead. That's an indication like it was from that group, right? Oh, here's a very clearly German pagan knife or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah, So this whole idea of going back to like spaces of non-being and how like what if exactly that, like we're not seeing what's actually there. So what we're seeing is almost like the veiled version. So it's like the empty version. But if we end up opening our perception a little bit more, maybe we'll see things. And we'll get to that with North American miners when they say that they've experienced something that is absolutely incredible, and that does sort of play into this whole alternative dimension or a portal opening up inside these spaces, these ambivalent spaces.
Right.
These sort of closer through the veil kind of areas or regions.
Yeah. And the way it's treated in Europe is like these subterranean galleries, as we described them before, are still found quite often, like usually by road crews or construction crews in different development areas, and they're promptly filled in.
Yeah.
They're not really treated as archaeological finds a lot of the time.
I did reference that earlier, and like the idea that these people aren't professionals, so they don't really know what to do with them. They have their own sort of quota to fill, so they'll just fill it in.
Yeah. And, I mean, whether for these reasons or not, right? Like, the fact that they're found and speculated on for all kinds of different reasons, the tunnels have been intimately connected with goblin folklore over the centuries, and some believe the phenomena can actually be traced into North America as well, which is where we are about to head.
Exactly. So kind of our big question now is like, can we tie in similar creatures in the area of North America, United States, and beyond, and creatures with this very famous case, the Kelly Hopkinsville encounter, with this sort of phenomenon that we've sort of been like experiencing, like that we've been alluding to in Europe, that we've been, you know what I mean?
Yeah, we've been building up to it for sure.
Exactly.
For sure. But before we get into, before we dive right into this, though, we do have a brief little promo break here, and the announcement for our Coffee Gator contest winner. So that's coming up in just a minute. We'll be back in just a sec.
In the shadowed recesses of our world, monsters lurk. beasts from a bygone era, obscured by the thickest forests, deepest oceans, and darkest corners. Despite our reluctance to find them and unlucky few cross paths, it's these experiences that we explore at Monsters Among Us podcast. My name is Derek Hayes, your faithful host and guide. Each week I explore calls from around the world detailing chilling encounters with mystery beasts, ghosts, UFOs, and a plethora of other strange happenings. You can find Monsters Among Us podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, and most other podcatchers. Beware, there truly are monsters among us.
And we're back. All right, so let's get into this. We are announcing our Coffee Gator contest winner.
That's my bad drum roll.
Yeah, so congratulations to Darren Budnick.
Whoop, whoop.
Woo! You have won our lovely little trivia contest. And so Darren is actually going to receive a brand new vacuum insulated French press coffee press from Coffee Gator.
That's right.
Yeah. And so they're the official sponsor of Into the Portal now. So all of y'all can go on to their website at coffeegator.com, and with our promo code CORK, spelled QUARK, you can receive 15% off your purchase today. Right. So yeah, you can drink better coffee with Coffee Gator. So many freaking cool things. It's not just French presses, people. So if you're not into the French press, don't even worry about it.
No. It's got all kinds of amazing stuff. Everything from amazing scales, stovetop brewers, kettles, grinders. They even do these epic like pour over travel mugs for tea and coffee on the go that are so cool. They're really, and the colors are so cool. I love it. They've got these forest greens and these like charcoal grays and stuff like that. It's just totally like our jam, and we think you guys will love it too.
Oh, totally. High quality, like, honestly, the aesthetic of it is what won me over. Because, like,
absolutely.
Coffee Gator, it's, we're all cryptozoological, so it's awesome.
The logo's super cool.
Yeah, it really is perfect for the more stylish, paranormal loving coffee addict,
absolutely.
So again, visit coffeegator.com today. Use promo code CORK, spelled QUARK, to get 15% off your purchase. And congrats to Darren.
Yeah, congrats, buddy.
Woohoo! We'll be contacting you shortly just to get your info so we can send that over to you.
All
and
right.
Yeah, let's get back into it.
Let's get back to the show. Mm-hmm. So, quick reference here to another North American creature that could be sort of lumped into the goblin lore category. It deserves its own episode on its own, like many sort of small bipedal strange creatures in North America do, right? But I wanted to reference it just because it does have a very, very similar physical appearance. I'm just shortening things now. I'm just going to start combining words together. We'll cut our times in half. These episodes are going to be half an hour on the dot. It's going to be easy. Similar to the goblins in Europe.
All right.
Similar to the creatures seen in the Hopkinsville case. This creature is known as the Pukwudgie. Okay. It's fitting the bill as goblin. It's also spelled, spelled Pukwudgie, sometimes with a dash in between the K and the W. Anyway, yeah, it's translated as Little Wild Man of the Woods That Vanishes, apparently.
Interesting.
Right?
So not of the cave, but of the wood.
Of the woods. We didn't get into a ton of detail on this. Again, it deserves its own episode. It's definitely a creature from, I believe, indigenous folklore that kind of had blended into just folklore of the region of Delaware.
Yeah, actually, that's interesting you bring that up, the whole Native American element, because when I was re-listening to the Astonishing Legends series on Kelly Hopkinsville in particular, they did have a small section where they were referencing just goblins in general, because Kelly Hopkinsville is kind of this weird, awkward split between a UFO and a goblin case.
Yeah, pretty much.
And they were just kind of referencing the Pukwudgie as well. And Forrest, he actually lumped in the Wendigo into that category as well. So,
well, they definitely have some similar attributes in the way that they can vanish, right? The creature of the woods that vanishes. But here's the thing. Here are the similar characteristics, right? Big head, big eyes, similar looking ear-like kind of protrusions, like in the Kelly case and some European cases, said to be 4 feet tall, around 120 centimeters-ish. Some range a little bit taller than that, but essentially like the size of a child. And according to legend, they can appear and disappear at will, lure people into their lairs and deaths, use magic. They even have tools like they'll have arrows and sometimes they can even be poison arrows, and the ability to create fire. These last couple descriptions are almost like, bleeding into descriptions that remind me of like Orang Pendek, where it's like these things are smart. They're more of a cryptozoological case
Creating
that can
fire.
use tools and are hominid-like, right? They're bipedal, they're 4 feet tall, but they live in the woods.
Totally.
These weird things.
That idea of creating fire is definitely more humanoid than like creature goblin-y kind of.
Right. But at the same time, of course, European goblins using tools, working in mines, like leading people to gold veins or leading them to their death. Very, very similar. So we
The
wanted
magic,
to just mention
so that sort of idea that they could be associated, not associated, but could be a parallel to the familiars, the goblin familiars and all that kind of
that
stuff.
too. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we, like Amber just referenced, we took a dive back into Astonishing Legends and their series on the Kelly Hopkinsville case, because the creatures in that case, like Amber just said, have kind of straddled the line between a UFO case and just this very, very strange, it's a very unique UFO case, one of the most iconic in history, right?
It is.
Scott and Forrest make the reference, I think, in part 2 about how it's very, very famous in Japan.
Yes.
And that the goblins are famous in Japan. The word goblin specifically, right? Like this case is
very,
very
very
famous
popular.
there.
And then they did mention too the yokai, I believe, too, and how those can kind of bleed into, they're like these spectral, ghostly apparitions, but kind of bleed into goblin lore too, in some references.
Definitely. And of course, we get this Japanese connection, modern connection that they talk about too with Pokemon, right?
That was the most interesting for me. The idea was it Sableye, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it looks very much like the Pukwudgie, or the Hopkinsville goblins,
or like Stitch,
or like Stitch from Lilo and Stitch. Absolutely.
With the teeth.
Hey, maybe that was influenced by Hopkinsville too in some way. The eyes and the ears and the head shape and things like that.
Oh, for sure. Are you kidding me? Oh my god, now that I think about it. Because obviously Stitch is extraterrestrial in origin.
Yes.
So, okay. So the elements we get here that kind of point to this being a UFO case for Kelly Hopkinsville in particular is the fact that you do see either a crash landing or you see lights in the sky phenomena shortly before this all goes down kind of thing. So then you got the appearance of these, like you just said, very goblin-like creatures that supposedly descended on this one farmhouse and terrorized this family of, what was it, like 11 people in this house?
It was a good chunk of, it was a large family living in this rural home, didn't even have running water, had basic electricity, and it was
TV.
1955. So just to give some other context here, you guys should definitely go check out that series if you haven't.
For
it's
sure.
Awesome. From Astonishing Legends there.
Very thorough.
But Hopkinsville is basically a town in rural Kentucky. The area is Kelly. Just a very, very sparse kind of group of houses around. I think those guys referenced like 120 families in sort of the outskirts of the district of Hopkinsville. It's kind of an unincorporated area that this family was
very rural.
was in, right? It's hardly changed in a half century since it was essentially created, this region. It's very, very, this is the heartland of America in a lot of ways, I suppose. I mean, I've never been there, but it's I imagine it as a place that hasn't changed a whole lot over the decades, right? Mm-hmm. But so it's a part of Kentucky that's very green and flat. With not, well, I don't even know here. It's described as having like plowed fields are separated only by greenery choked hollows. So anyway, I mean, this family was like subsistence farming. It's a forested area with, not a lot of people, lots of wooded areas, and just like places where obviously a crash landing would be not necessarily noticed. In this case, it was, though.
One thing that is notable about this case is the fact that it wasn't just the family that witnessed the supposed crash landing of a UFO or unidentified flying object. And that to me points to lends to the legitimacy of what they reported in the end. Because, like we said, there's going to be elements of this, like Scott and Forrest get into it in way much more detail than we're going to bother with right now. Just go listen to it. It's worth your time. But essentially what happens is you get a lot of people just outright just denying that anything ever took place here. And a lot of it has to do with, I would say, subtle cultural discrimination. I'm not going to say racial discrimination, but it is this sort of idea that, these are just a bunch of dumb hicks in the South that don't know what an owl looks like.
Right.
If you talk to Joe Nickel, that's essentially what he's going to say, is that they were drunk and that they saw a bunch of owls.
Right.
And that to me is absurd. I'm definitely not of the mind that anything like that occurred.
I agree.
Because, first of all, there's so many things that lend to the defense of the family in this particular scenario, I would say. But do you want to get into, like, just the general story, I guess? Like,
sure. So we've described the kind of area, and this is exactly where this became known as the Kelly-Hopkinsville. The case at Kelly was the first official report, I think, but the Kelly-Hopkinsville encounter, so to speak, where, this encounter with extraterrestrial beings is how it was originally described, but we're getting into goblins. So, like Amber kind of alluded to as well, like UFOologists have regarded it as one of the most significant and well-documented cases, and then on the flip side, other people use it as just this case of just mass misidentification, natural phenomena, possibly meteors, owls, and it's used for a look at critical thinking.
Exactly. And there was one supposedly peer-reviewed paper that wasn't very reviewed that Scott and Forrest get into in part 3, and it's a very interesting conversation as to exactly what you were just saying, right? These different lines or delineations of authority and what people have to say on this.
Definitely. And it got spun from the family a lot.
Oh, yeah.
But here's the gist of the story, though. So on the evening of August 21st in 1955, there was 5 adults and 7 children that were living in this house. They claim to have basically gone under siege by tiny little green creatures. They ended up rushing off to the local Hopkinsville police station, claiming that these alien creatures came from a spaceship and were attacking their farmhouse. They had been holding off the gunfire, holding them off with gunfire, because of course they're packed with gats, for nearly 4 hours. So the 2 adults, Elmer Sutton and Billy Ray Taylor. Billy Ray was the one who kind of took the brunt of being embellishing it, because he worked at carnivals, and that kind of didn't lend a lot to his character, which isn't fair.
Well, that's not fair either.
But,
and he was like the family storyteller too.
Right. So he liked to tell stories, but he was clearly upset. The police didn't just send, even Scott and Forrest make the point of saying, they didn't just send their one, trainee police officer to just kind of deal with these crazy hicks that were going out of control. They took it seriously, and they sent a good number. I can't remember the exact number.
I don't know either, but there was multiple police there at the house.
Right. Anyway. So, but before they even got there, they were shooting at these dark figures who repeatedly popped up and peered into the windows, and they seemingly kept coming out of the dark. They kept coming out of complete darkness into visibility. They would be shot at, and all they would really get was a metallic ba-dang.
Like an old school Western.
Pretty much.
Yeah. That's an interesting part too, because if you go back to the whole Joe Nickel thing and how it's, these were just horned owls and blah, 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 these hicks don't know what owls look like.
Right. So they bust into the police station, and the quote was just that they're frantic and they've we need help. We've been fighting them for nearly 4 hours. Is this a direct quote here? Just sorry before you transition into your section.
Into my section. Yeah, I was just going to say with Joe Nickel, his whole theory that this is owls doesn't make any sense when you do bring into the picture that whole idea that there is these pings going on when they supposedly made contact with these things. And Scott and Forrest get into it again, owls don't behave in that way where they're just going to say drift to the ground, then disappear into the forest, and then reappear shortly after, just totally fine.
So completely absurd.
I don't know, it doesn't make any sense to me. As well, there are variations. It goes from an army of goblins to where witnesses actually say that they only saw one at a time.
One at a time, yeah.
At most 2. So again, this is kind of just, there's a lot of variation, and I don't even know, again, because I haven't gone through the primary sources for this or anything, but I don't know if that was just a misinterpretation from people that have come subsequently, or if this was actually from the witnesses. Yeah, what else do we have to say about this here? I don't know. There's these faces appearing at the window. Clearly, if these are right up in your face, you're not going to misinterpret that as an owl.
Well, it's not going to... Yeah, no, it's completely absurd that would even be suggested at all. It makes absolutely no sense. It's even less likely, I think, than neighbors painting their faces, dressing up and physically messing with these people, and then running away, and then they made up the rest. Honestly, I don't know. It's crazy to me.
Yeah, so anyways, Joe Nickel, again, I'm sorry, I'm kind of making him the devil, but he kind of concluded that these were just drunk, intoxicated people that witnessed great horned owls, and that to me is absurd because if you take any sort of scientific approach to this, and even the pseudoscientific approach, right, the process of elimination, and I feel like the authors of that paper that Scott and Forrest reference repeatedly in their part 3 don't actually follow their own advice, which is really frustrating.
It really, really is. And you made the comment to me too that like the only real reference at all to liquor came from just one out of many, many, many of the police officers, right? Mm-hmm. So it was like based on nothing in the report, in some of the original...
and he honestly didn't even... He had nothing to back that up. He just said, oh, they're probably drinking.
That's right. Like, the matriarch of the family didn't allow hard liquor in the house, and they only ever found a couple of beer cans in there and stuff like that. Yeah, it was just...
So subsequently, in the days after that, you had a sort of an amateur... Like, he was like a fill-in radio host or journalist or whatever at the local radio station that went to the house, interviewed these people, actually got the description down, he drew an illustration, and that is kind of the basis of what we know as these Kelly Hopkinsville's goblins.
Right.
We don't actually get any association to subterranean caves, tunnels, anything like that in this case. The only thing that really connects it back to what we're talking about with our Goblin series is this physical description.
That's right.
And the area that it comes from, because Kentucky is huge for a big reason in this series, and we've just kind of called this section Subterranean Kentucky.
Yes, we have.
Exactly. So again, one of the big questions surrounding this Kentucky Goblins case is whether or not some of these cave systems might be associated or extend into other states where these sort of sightings have taken place of creatures resembling something we can call a goblin or something like that.
Something of small stature coming out of a cave is what we're working with now. Bipedal.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Exactly, yeah. The thing is, too, like, Kelly Hopkinsville is weird, right? Because you get green thrown in there.
You do.
You don't really see that anywhere else. Like, I haven't seen that anywhere else.
We haven't really gotten a lot of the color descriptions, even with the European references, right?
No.
We didn't a lot of the time.
Oh, and another really important thing, because we're getting into more modern stuff and a little bit of stuff from a really recently released documentary series called Hellier, which was a little bit of the original inspiration as to why we decided to do this series on Goblin lore and the genesis and the history of it all, because there was a lot of unanswered questions for us in that series.
Yes.
But essentially, we're getting into, like... Oh, sorry, the point I was going to make before we move into that is just... We never got any descriptions of the feet for European. Now that I'm thinking about it, we don't have any descriptions of what... how many toes?
No, it never really came up.
No.
They were usually described as creatures that had footwear. They were clothed.
Oh, yeah, that was right. The metallic boots.
Right?
Yeah.
Whether it was the metallic boots or whether it was just... I mean, yeah, like they were like, or minor, like just like miners. That's the folkloric element to it, right? Whereas if you're dealing with a hard, like with physical evidence of a footprint, it's like, okay, well, now we're outside the realm. Yeah, it never really came up, but people would reference that like there was remnants of them being in a tunnel, right? And that's the connection to the Erdstall tunnels, I think. There's these tunnels of ridiculously small stature for no apparent reason.
Yeah. So again, you get a parallel with the stature, the size of the thing that would have been able to fit inside of these things.
And the locations of a lot of these legends.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what we're kind of getting into now, I guess, is this idea that there is a massive... The largest cave system in the entire world located in Kentucky.
Yes.
And so that's why we're kind of referring to this Subterranean Kentucky. And it's known as the Mammoth Caves. And it's part of a national park located in southern Kentucky.
Yep.
Bordering North Carolina, which has another really famous, it's the Brown Mountain. So that, again, will play into all this.
Definitely.
And... yeah, so this is the largest network of underground caves. Another huge distinction, though, that I'm going to make right off the bat from the Erdstall tunnels to these caves is the fact that they're natural. The Mammoth Caves are naturally formed limestone caves formed over 350 million years.
Yes.
Just through erosion, water action, that type of thing.
Right.
And these Erdstall tunnels, definitely not. So those are totally different, but again...
but still...
subterranean.
Exactly.
What's using these things?
Right.
What lives in these things?
I picture the Erdstall ones as like I said before, the driveway to the other larger potential cave systems. Like these ones here.
Exactly. So what we're kind of drawing together here in loose associations is these Kelly Hopkinsville's creatures with possible subterranean creatures lurking in Kentucky and southern Kentucky bordering North Carolina, which actually has quite an extensive history itself related to the Brown Mountain lights.
Right.
And how these have, again, developed associations with underground dwelling creatures. And this is where it all gets very much, like, you can go like, oh, grand unifying theory, boom, because you have this reference to aliens, UFOs, orbs, goblins, and possible interdimensional sort of things going on. So is it extraterrestrial? Is it interdimensional? I don't know.
No, totally, and that's sort of what that Hellier series ended up sort of being based around, right?
Yeah.
Without really kind of pinning down anything. But
no. It's all very shaky. There's loose associations. I'm not going to say that this is definitive by any means, but I'm saying like there's a lot going on here, and that we can kind of draw maybe parallels. We can draw connections, to descriptions of the creatures themselves and just geographic locations.
Right.
So, okay, these mammoth caves are super impressive, though. Like, let's get into that, because to me, this is amazing. All right, so we're talking about over 350 miles, or 500 kilometers if you're Canadian, of passages that are known. And as much as 600 additional miles might exist, but are unmapped as of this moment.
Wow.
Making this the largest known cave system in the world.
That is crazy.
And archaeological evidence indicates that American Indians were actually living in the area and exploring this from the late Archaic period between 5,000 to 3,000 years ago.
Wow.
Which is amazing. And European settlers, I love how they phrase this, European settlers first found the caves in 1789. Wow. It's like, no, you didn't find it first. You were last to the table there.
Last. Dead last.
These are really impressive caves. Like, they have been designated as a UN World Heritage Site. That was in 1981. And like I said before, these are natural. They're formed from, it's the product of the karst photography. Oh my god, topography. I can't talk today.
Topography.
I love karst landscapes. They look beautiful from above. Like, you get just all sorts of lakes. It almost just looks like it's like a colander with all these perforations, and it's all very flat and very. You almost get like the shield. Like, the Canadian shield is actually karst topography. Oh my god, I can't say that word. Photography. I'm trying to say like photography and photography at the same time.
Now you're just, oh man. The struggle is real, people.
The struggle's real.
That's so funny.
One thing I did want to bring up too is this bottomless pit, which is so freaking cool, man.
Yeah, that's pretty
and frightening because apparently it's bottomless. Is this a hell pit?
Well, that's very much like, the pit that's was allegedly beneath Hoska, like places where the flow of water, there's no exit to it, right?
Things coming out of it. Oh my goodness. Okay, but anyways, this bottomless pit was actually first crossed by a slave tour guide in, I believe, I can't remember what the year was, but it was in the mid 1800s.
Okay.
And this guy, he was a slave, and his name was Stephen Bishop. He worked in the cave from 1838 to 1856, and he was the one that crossed the pit. I don't even want to imagine how the hell he would have done that. Like, do you just, like, throw a rope, or, like,
I don't know.
Do you do, like, the crossbow, where you just, like, have, like, the line, and you just, like, shimmy across it, like Ace Ventura in the beginning of the Nature Calls? I don't know.
I have no idea. That's definitely...
Pretty cool, though. Like, he made history, and, like, he mapped out all sorts of previously unknown caves and tunnels and caverns.
Wow.
I'm wondering now, is this the system that's featured in The Descent?
Ooh, good question. I can't remember that.
I have no idea.
You really just don't want to rewatch that movie, so I suppose we won't know.
No,
I'm too terrified.
I'm too scared.
Well, why don't we just go looking for goblins instead, and we can descend ourselves?
Oh, frick. But in The Descent, right, you do get goblin-like creatures in the end, right?
Very much so.
Oh, gross.
I mean, they are subterranean, small, slippery creatures of nefarious
eyeless
intent.
Things. And that's where we get into all sorts of cool things, because unlike these Erdstall tunnels of Europe that are, like, super sparse and unoccupied, uninhabited, there's nothing going on there, supposedly, this actually contains a rich ecosystem. So, including some animals that actually need to live in caves, known as troglobites. Okay. There's 14 species of those, and this is kind of interesting. They call it a cavernicolous creature.
Wow.
Yeah, and then there's this one species of eyeless cave fish, which is like I think it's endemic to this environment, but it basically has evolved to the lightless environment by no longer growing eyes.
Very interesting.
Which is really cool to me.
Super weird. Could you imagine that type of a life? That'd be so bizarre.
Oh, it's
very much
freaky,
like
man.
the same sort of like, deep sea creatures that live in complete darkness.
Oh, totally. And they're all like see-through. They're all like translucent.
It's bizarre.
There was one I saw that was like a translucent scorpion-looking thing. It was pretty cool.
Dang.
Yeah. So then the question becomes, obviously, like, home to a lot of different species things going on here. Could this be home to subterranean goblin-like creatures, too?
Potentially, right? I do just want to say something, too, about the Hopkinsville case.
Oh, yeah?
The association with the UFOs and the sighting of a potential meteor or a craft of some kind before this event took place is kind of why, obviously, it's associated as a UFO case. But we're also dealing with 1955. This was not only a decade in which UFO sightings went crazy, but that year in and of itself was very much UFO oriented. This isn't even that far after the Maury Island incident and things that, right? So UFOs were on the mind. I mean, sci-fi movies were going crazy in the 1950s as well, and I don't think goblins or the possible association with other types of creatures was as likely as UFOs.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, like what was in vogue at the time.
Pretty much.
Well, it's the fashion.
The fashion, and also, obviously, there was a sighting of something in the sky.
Yes.
But that automatic association with that to this event, even though that other than it be happening in the same rough area, is kind of technically a loose connection. Because you don't actually get a physical craft or whatever else, right?
That's interesting, too, yeah. Yeah, you're totally right about that. I feel like there is this awkward sort of, not juxtapositioning, but like an awkward sort of placement with these UFO versus like a goblin, like crypto, whatever kind of thing. And the conflation arises, I think, in the 60s when you get the introduction of a man we're going to talk about in just a second. And he is the famous Brown Mountain case of these subterranean goblins that are supposedly extraterrestrial creatures. And Brown Mountain is very well known for having orb phenomena, light phenomena that's unexplained, and we're going to get into that in just a second here, but we have a couple other things we're going to cover.
Yeah, this
related
story
to Kentucky
is
specifically. It is really, really cool. So, yeah, Kentucky has a strange history of underground run-ins with, I'll term, inexplicable folk.
Okay.
Or simply people disappearing into these labyrinth-like networks of tunnels and never emerging. And having no evidence of what actually happened to them. So vanishing underground. No evidence of anything.
No,
anyways.
and no reason why they should have vanished.
Exactly. Oh my gosh. Okay, so this is 1949, Pikeville, Kentucky. And this is a quote. One of the most baffling disappearances on record centers around a truck coal mine 3 miles east of Pikeville on Chloe Creek in Pikeville County, Kentucky. On a warm day in September 1949, Marvin Johnson, age 20, and his cousin, George Johnson, age 19, were working at the mine with their fathers, including Tom Johnson Sr. I don't know who that is. Apparently he's important.
Okay, all right.
They ignited a fuse to a charge of black powder to loosen a coal seam. Then they left the mine to eat their lunches and awaited the blast. They heard the muffled explosion, and after waiting until the smoke had cleared away, the two boys started toward the mine entrance to resume shoveling. They carried an old-fashioned carbide cap lamp, which later was found unlit at the mine entrance. That was the last their fathers ever saw of them. They're in there, Tom Johnson Sr. later said. We saw them go in. As the hours passed and the two boys failed to appear from deeper in the mine where they were thought to be working, their fathers grew alarmed. They notified state and federal mine authorities, and within a few hours, over 200 men were searching the mine's dangerous labyrinth of crisscrossing corridors. The searchers found no trace of the boys. A pair of bloodhounds brought to the mine found no trail. After 3 weeks, the state and federal mine inspectors reported that they were certain every part of the mine had been investigated and that there was no possibility that a rockfall had sealed the two cousins in an abandoned room. State police circulated a missing persons bulletin, and police authorities in cities to which the boys might have gone were notified. No clue ever found, or never turned up. And that was from Fate magazine. So again, take that with a little bit of a grain of salt, I guess.
A little bit of a grain of salt, but still, I mean, that potentially ties into the lore. I mean, the Pukwudgie with the Lurin, or with the goblins in Europe and the ideas of potentially, tricking miners, right? Tricking them into leading them to a vein of gold when really they are leading them to something else.
Totally. And then the whole idea that the lamp was found at the entrance, again, speaks to me that something came and left it there, right?
Or that they were almost in a trance and they just put it down and wandered into the abyss.
Just into the dark.
I don't know. That's almost even more freaky, like some sort of mind control, right?
Yeah.
It gets even weirder. Actually, a few years earlier than this, in 1945, in Pineville, Kentucky, there were mine workers who were actually trapped underground. So in this case, there was a cave-in. And while trapped, they insisted that they witnessed a figure resembling a lumberjack emerge from a door in a wall of the shaft of one of the mine shafts. So this is a quote here. When they were rescued, some of the men insisted that they saw a, quote, door in one of the walls open, and a man dressed as a lumberjack emerge from a well-lit room. Okay, coming from another place of some kind. I don't even know what to make of that. After assuring the men that they would be rescued, the strange visitor returned into the room and closed the door, just disappearing. So
into the other dimension.
Exactly. Other similar accounts have been reported during similar mine disasters, such as the one at Shipton, Pennsylvania, where a similar lumberjack-type creature, type man. I mean... they never say the size, eh? They don't say the size, but that ties in with just the minor goblin-type appearance, right?
The other description is like this telephone line man type of man. So it's like a lumberjack or a telephone line man. So that's interesting, like a professional kind of...
Interesting. Okay, so it's like almost as if in some cases they almost take on the role of a guardian angel in a way, like offering the trapped men like a light in the dark essentially. But in other cases, it's very much the opposite of that.
Well, not even that so much. It kind of reminds me of like Injured Cold, where it's like, because they'll tell them you'll be okay, or they'll say like like kind of be like, oh, you're gonna get rescued. Like I basically could see further down the line, like an Injured Cold, like when we watched the Mothman prophecies with Richard Gere. Shout out to
Richard Haddam. Yeah, shout out, man. What's up?
Two Riches. I was like, oh, wait a second, is his name Richard or Richard?
That must have got real confusing on the set.
It must have been, yeah.
Hey, Richard, did you get this juice?
But yeah, okay, so there's a lot to this. The idea that there's a door and this lumberjack thing would emerge from a well-lit room, that instantly reminds me of Skinwalker Ranch, when there would be these portals or these sort of doorways or these circles of light that would get bigger, and then things would emerge from them.
Right.
Yeah. And then go back into them, and then would like close back up. And it was almost as if they could see like the family. I can't remember their names off the top of my head, but they would, in the night sky, they would describe how they would see something open, and it was like they were looking at daylight in another dimension.
Bizarre, right? This is reminding me of Skinwalker Ranch.
For sure.
Which doesn't necessarily lend to me claiming that this isn't really grand. Like, there's lots of connections here that you can talk about grand unifying theory, like you mentioned before, because we're dealing with perceivably individual phenomena that happen to be happening at the same time, but that they could be connected. I don't know how many hard black lines we can draw between these things to really connect them.
Well, that's just it. We're not even really trying to do that so much, but we're just kind of illuminating all these sort of...
We're setting the stage for it anyway, at least with things, tangible things to reference, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So going back to the idea of North Carolina and the Brown Mountain connection, and this was referenced in the Hellier series, and like we mentioned before, that was sort of one of the reasons why we decided to cover goblins, because we wanted to do more of our own digging on it. So yeah, they mentioned this, the Brown Mountain of North Carolina. It's, like you said, mentioned due to the prevalence of orb, UFO, strange lights. Very, very strange. Very, very strange.
Long history of this,
Here's a quote from Brown Mountain Lights, a 2017 book. So, okay, hold on a second here. From Wiseman's view on Linville Mountain, the lights can be seen well. The first appear like a large star coming over the mountain. Sometimes they have a reddish or bluish cast. On dark nights, they pop up so thick and fast that it's impossible to count them. And this actually comes from Weak and Weird.
Yeah, that was a quote from, I read through their whole article with the Hellier series there. It's so interesting, though, because this goes back way, way longer, right? Like 1200 AD, Cherokee natives are witnessing this phenomena happening on Brown Mountain. So it's not as if this is new by any means. Yeah, and like we said, right, like, so Brown Mountain is on the northwest side of North Carolina. It's close to the southern border of Kentucky. Did I say bordy?
I think you said bordy.
The southern border of Kentucky. The southern 40. It's 40 all over again.
Yeah, our dog has a board. It's just literally just a piece of wood, and we named it Bordy. She likes to chew on it.
we chuck it into the water, and she goes and fetches it, and it's really awkward.
Save Bordy.
Gets a couple of slivers, I would imagine.
Right, yeah, well.
Anyways, yeah. But yeah, the southern border of Kentucky. So this is kind of loosely where the Mammoth Cave network starts.
Right.
So possible connections, right? And yeah, so you were mentioning these lights, right? A lot of people have brought up this idea that it could be a version of the Fata Morgana phenomena.
Oh, okay.
And it's almost like a trick of the light, right? So just to recap that, so basically from large different distances, you can get an inversion of temperature, so air masses. So if you get an inversion of that, it can actually create these long distance, like kilometers and miles long of like, it's basically like apparitions of light. It almost looks like orbs. We reference this in our Min Light.
I was just going to
series.
say, our patrons that listen to that will be familiar with this.
Totally.
For sure.
Yeah. And so basically what happens is you get what appears to be like a Charlie Red Star like phenomena, or like just an orb like thing that's just like can act in very strange ways, right?
Yeah.
Like, again, this non-ballistic motion, all sorts of weird things.
So here we are again. I mean, this is not goblins. This is just phenomena emanating from caves, also associated with subterranean, possibly.
Well, exactly, right. Okay, so just to explain that further. So the trick of the light was actually debunked. This is not Fata Morgana by any means. There was this one instance where there was a lot of flooding that occurred, and it wiped out all the tracks for the locomotives in the area for weeks.
Interesting.
And at this time, the phenomena was still there. It continued on.
So there's no way.
No interruptions. And the fact that it's like seen in the Appalachian Mountains is like it's on a mountain. It's not like, because like Min Lights, that extends over like
Flat.
Exactly. Like you get
Flatlands.
subtle dips and hills and whatever, but it's not
Right.
a
Very
mountain.
different landscape, though. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, the real question here, then, right, is could Brown Mountain and some sightings of these strange things be connected to possible subterranean phenomena? Okay, so
this
actually
is my favorite part of this
totally.
whole
So there is a story that actually connects the lights phenomena to subterranean creatures living in a base deep inside the mountain.
And this comes in 1961. So a local furniture salesman by the name of Ralph Lale actually claimed. So he was a pretty ordinary guy up until this point in his life.
I'd say so, yeah.
But he got kind of fascinated. He heard about the brown lights phenomena. He went there, studied it extensively, like observed it quite a bit, and actually ended up following it. And he claimed that when he followed it, he found like a secret entrance into this brown mountain, and he found a race of tiny extraterrestrial creatures that had made their home in the mountain. So this is where we're connecting orb light phenomena, Brown Mountain, Kentucky, Subterranean, all this kind of stuff. So it's all very loosely.
Well, hell, I mean, geez, we could draw parallels to all kinds of episodes we've done then too, right? Like, what about the Depths of Baikal episode where there's orbs being seen, and then all of a sudden these...
The silver swimmers?
I mean, they're not subterranean, but they are down there just as deep.
And silver?
Aquatic.
Silver could be interpreted as, like, a misinterpretation of what am I trying to say? Like, a semi-transparent...
Okay, yeah.
Translucent people,
yeah, definitely.
right?
So in a place where there's not much light.
Oh my god, what if they're like half newts, half people?
Half newts. Well, Paracelsus makes the reference to salamanders as one of the elementals,
There
right?
you go.
So we're drawing lines all over the place here.
But the thing is too with Lyle is that in one story it was like he had found this race. In another story he was kidnapped. I don't know which to believe there.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. And you've got the continuation of it here. I guess I'll read it. So when he actually, so after following the mysterious Brown Mountain lights through the forest one night, he claimed to have stumbled onto a camouflaged entrance in the side of one of the mountains. And then when he entered this opening, he claimed to have been met by creatures from another planet, or at least that's how he perceived it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you don't have any other frame of reference, that's what you're probably going to think.
It's the 60s.
There's no interdimensional idea potentially, or
totally,
whatever,
yeah.
right? So his family and friends noted that sometimes he would disappear for weeks at a time as he explored these intricate mazes inside the mountain.
Very cool.
And then in 1965, he wrote a book filled with these bizarre details related to his journey through these tunnels and his alleged discovery. But he didn't just return from the alien cave base with an unbelievable tale. He actually returned with something else as well. He claimed to possess a full-fledged alien mummy that he kept on display in the back of his shop, and sometime in the late 1970s, right?
He had a rock shop. Just FYI.
Like selling like rocks.
Like Tony's rock shop.
Oh, I used to love that shop when I was a kid.
Too.
Go get some amethyst or
that
something.
That makes sense though if you think about it, right? If he's going into this mountain
to find rocks,
he's quarrying rocks, he's bringing back crystals, all sorts of crazy stuff, and supposedly an alien mummy.
I'm going to make this reference right now because we haven't yet, with the previous story with the miners trapped and seeing a lumberjack and things too. When you are trapped in small spaces and there's possibly gaseous emissions and other types of things and lack of oxygen, there's hallucinations that can take place.
And just to clarify that even further, the quote was some of the miners claimed, not all. So again,
but the ones that didn't claim didn't necessarily go out of their way to deny.
Maybe they were passed out. Maybe they were crying in the corner and they couldn't actually comprehend what was going on, so they didn't even see it.
Maybe.
That'd probably be me. I'd just be weeping. Like, I'm gonna die.
Oh, man. So yeah, this alien mummy, a researcher by the name of Timothy Green Beckley, a ufologist, he had been one of the many UFO hunters to actually visit the area and managed to take a photo of this alien on one of his visits.
I believe it's the only known record of this alien actually being in existence, and I actually have it in my images folder, so we will be including that on our website.
Definitely.
Maybe that'll be the image of the week.
Right.
Yeah.
And the question obviously with that is if it's what the hell is it? And this guy,
what happened to it?
What happened to it? This guy's claiming it was an alien, but he was going into caves, and that's definitely odd for what we're dealing with today.
It's for me that comes down to exactly that: perception, interpretation.
Yes.
And the limits of such, like the tools that you have to comprehend what is going on around you.
The lens you're looking through, right?
Because again, right, this is a very modern case, and you get him immediately go extraterrestrial with this. And who knows what kind of quote-unquote information was relayed from this sort of alien race to him as to what their origins were and whatever else. Like, I haven't read his book. I can't remember what it's actually called. I don't think we actually referenced it. But look it up. Ralph Lale. It's definitely a real book. Originally published as a pamphlet that he just had featured in his little rock shop.
Right.
But again, right, okay, so you get him interpreting this as extraterrestrial. We have I keep forgetting their name, but like the German Goblin, right? The Kobold. I feel as though, again, we're getting culturally relevant interpretations. Kobolds, like, I don't know if there's any reference in medieval German culture to UFOs. Like, you know what I mean? I don't think that was a thing.
Not like not standard, not in the public consciousness, but there was definitely sightings, obviously, throughout history. But yeah, not like the Kobold would have been, obviously.
Exactly. It's not like they would associate that with saucers coming from the sky or strange lights and orbs and all that stuff.
Like
we didn't get any reference to that at all.
No.
So that's kind of a unique feature to North American Goblin phenomena.
A lot of the time.
UFO phenomena.
Yeah, except for the Pukwudgie and creatures like this.
Oh, true.
That are, dwelling in the woods and things like that of small stature. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, it's hard to really come to any sort of conclusion with this.
Oh, no.
We obviously
I don't even want to try.
we loosely referenced the Hellier series, and they were drawing the connections to the Hopkinsville and trying to...
And John Keel
and these types of things. My question is, we've got a lot of questions with that series. We're not going to get into picking that apart or anything like that. But one of the things that stood out to me that was interesting was the idea that in the Hopkinsville case, I mean, the family was besieged by these creatures, right? And then again, in the Hellier series, that's how they were making that association, because this alleged message they were receiving was a similar case, right? Like under siege and harassing the kids and tapping on the window and things like that. But then when it came to the attempts at communication, it was like they were dealing with something that was much more like an injured cold. Like, it was much more like, why would you go from TP in a house and just causing mischief to all of a sudden being very timid and only communicating in very sparse, strange ways, right? Those things are very, very, very disassociated and don't have any real connections.
Well, yeah.
What are we dealing with here? Is it a creature or is it a single connection to a world of creatures?
Exactly.
Right? And so anyway.
Yes. And so, okay, and even just to clarify that even more, the connection between Hopkinsville and this series of emails that they received in 2012 from this unknown source, right? They were never able to confirm where it came from. They had like 3 different IP addresses in the end, right?
Right.
And I think they kind of implied that was just kind of like a masking mechanism, so they don't know where it originated from.
Yeah.
Could have potentially been in Hellier, could have not been. But again, so for that story, there was a lot of parallels to the Kelly Hopkinsville siege in his account, except way longer, right? Because he was experiencing this over a series of months or years or whatever until he decided to flee, as the story goes.
Right.
But again, that's where you get a reaffirmation of the physical description that relates back to Kelly Hopkinsville, and then you get the added element of them coming from the caves.
Right.
And the footprints, right, that he provided, that he showed the entrance that looked like it was full of slurry, right? So that was like washout from a mine shaft entrance.
Yeah.
And then the footprints that almost looked like Teletubby footprints to me.
Yeah, something along those lines.
It was very much like that. But so that's where we get this association, right? And then they were tying it into the Brown Mountain, right? Because we get this Ralph Lale connection and how he was basically saying that there is a race of these tiny, weird UFO creature-like things.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So there's all sorts of parallels. And for me, it's like, I have a hard time referencing any of those emails because I just feel like there's a very shaky foundation for the legitimacy of what that guy said. Nothing was ever confirmed. Like, this guy could literally be some freaking 13-year-old boy that just has way too much time on his hand and had a series of 2 years where he's like, oh, fun, I'll just send a random email every 8 months and just fuck with these people and get whatever.
Yeah, maybe not 13, but I mean, totally.
Not 13. I would say maybe like, 17 to 18.
Obviously someone familiar with these types of cases, right?
Well, exactly.
And the Mothman case, probably. And,
definitely.
And all those types of things.
Because then they kind of started to imply this whole Terry Wrist thing and making these sort of subtle, loose parallels to the whole Keel phenomena.
Yeah.
And
I will say, like, I give him a ton of credit for the cinematography, and it was well done, well put together series, and you know, I enjoyed it to a certain extent. Definitely was disappointed in the outcome and with some of the methods used, but overall definitely just different than what we would probably do, which is kind of cool, right? I mean, you got to try things different ways.
It's a place to start, yeah.
Definitely, and definitely a unique take because it takes us into that world of the grand unifying theory here. Yeah. And crossing over from different cultures from across the pond. So I'm glad we went back and did that because I really kind of framed it better for me in trying to wrap my head around all this because it's super
exactly
weird.
It. Yeah, wrapping your head around it all. For me, right, like by the time we got to end of part 5 of that series, there was just so much left unanswered for me that it was great. Exactly. There's left unanswered. Yeah. And that was it's just great inspiration for what we've done with this.
I feel like there probably will be a part 3 that we end up doing, not in sequence with this, but like just as a follow-up. Because who knows, like where things are going to go. And I think there'll be more stuff for us to follow up on with their series too, from Week and Weird and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But ultimately, do you believe that goblins exist?
Oh, you're asking me?
Or metaphysically? Yes, I'm asking you.
I thought you were just throwing that out there.
I'm asking everybody. I'm asking everyone out there.
Course.
But I'm curious. I want to get your answer here before we sign off.
Well, of course. The more I dive into this, the more I believe that there is something going on here. And whether, like we said, I'll always go back to this perception, interpretation, and the ultimate subjectivity of it all, right? You are inherently limited by your way of thinking, your way of knowing.
Definitely. And
the tools that you have, like the knowledge that you have. And so, again, I'll go back to this, like, culturally relative sort of hypothesis where it's like you are going to see instances and a lot of the terminology, is going to be different, but
Yes.
the phenomenon, the descriptions are going to be very, very similar.
Definitely. I'm 100% on board with that. And it's culturally based and it's era based. So it's like when we're looking back into ancient Greece and then the evolution from that into pagan Europe and then into Germanic Europe and all these types of things, there's no, and then when we look Nordic too, and we're like troll folklore, dwarf folklore, and those associations with goblins and the very real beliefs and legends up there of trolls living in the woods and stuff like that. Then we cross over to the pond into eras like 1955, a heavily packed UFO, alien, extraterrestrial oriented era. You're getting different associations with very similar creatures.
Oh, totally. And isn't that an interesting, I'm not going to call it a devolution, but it's definitely like I guess an evolution of the concept, right? Because in ancient Greece, these things were closely associated with demigods of the world, of the gods, and all this kind of stuff. Now what we're getting is close association to cryptozoology, occult, and then UFO. So it's almost like this new sort of cult of religion or something.
Totally. And I think alchemy is kind of almost like the rope straddling the lines between that old world version of it and thinking about the elementals and possible, metaphysical ideas like that. And then our UFOlogy, same sort of interdimensional but different kind version of it, modern day. You know what I mean? And Paracelsus straddled that line for us real nice there, which is really cool.
Yeah.
I certainly believe that there is something like goblin creatures that are elementals. They can come and go maybe as they please or maybe not. Maybe just in areas like certain cave systems. And they just happen to be sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just gonna leave off from this one point about the Aristotle tunnels and the whole where we get these apertures, these openings in the minors of the cases that we saw in Kentucky and the U.S. and how again, right, the veil. Is there a veil? And we're just not seeing. It's almost like the limits again of our perception. But anyways, what do you guys think? We want to know.
Totally. Reach out to us. Send us direct emails. We love that. Into the Portal mailbox at gmail.com or hit us up on Facebook at Into the Portal Podcast, Instagram at Into the Portal Podcast, Twitter at Into the Portal 1. And come follow us on there. And we really want to know what you guys think of this. We really, really want to know. Do these things exist, and in what way do they exist?
Exactly.
Describe that to us, because we want to know. So thank you so much for listening.
And sorry, just more specifically, this whole connection between the European to North American, Brown Mountain, Kentucky, Mammoth Caves, all this kind of stuff. We want to know.
Absolutely.
And I just, right before we sign off here, I guess, congratulations again to Darren Budnick.
Yes,
for winning
congrats,
that.
man. You'll be we'll be sending that off very, very soon here for you.
Yeah, we'll be hearing from us shortly.
We hope that you'll post some pictures of you making some epic coffee, and so we can take a look at you enjoying that.
Get your latte art on.
That's right. Well, he's going to need it out there. I think he's on Pender Island, and they have been getting hammered with snow, and he didn't move out there for the snow. They moved out there to avoid that. So nice cozy up with a nice hot coffee.
Yeah.
But before we sign off, obviously, thank you so much to our producer, Charlene Ramler. We couldn't do this without you, and all of our Patreon supporters. Thank you guys so much. And thank you to all of our listeners as usual. We hope you enjoyed this series on goblins and that you learned a few things, and we definitely did along the way here. Do we know what we're doing next week for Film Friday? Not quite yet.
No, we might actually be taking a break.
Okay, that's okay. Well, we'll post about it and let you guys know. But until then, thank you guys so much.
Yeah, until next time.
This was a podcast from the thePodfix Network. You can check out more shows like it at podfixnetwork.com.